Okay.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Dobar dan. Happy Kartik month. I'm happy to be at the Bhakti Yoga Center in my motherland, in this life, in this incarnation. Like incarnation in terms of a conditioned soul being inside a body. Speaking to Sundarananda Prabhu earlier today, and we agreed that it would be a good idea to read from the Sri Damodarastakam, the prayers to Damodar, since we are in the month of Kartik. We all know this song, Damodarastakam, Namam Ishvaram Sachit Anandarupam, etc. And since we all know it, and since it's this time of year, I think it's a good idea that we all, since we have already, most of us have already chanted it once or twice or 3 times or whatever, maybe it's a good idea that we all read the verses together now and absorb ourselves in the translations of the verse so that it's more fresh tomorrow and the day after and the subsequent days when we read it and sing it. So, Damodarastakam. We'll just go as far as we can in the prayers. This song was written by Satyavrata Muni, and it comes actually in the Padma Purana. So here's the first verse. Namamishvaram Satchidanandarupam Lasat Kundalam Gokuli Brajamanam Yashoda Biyolu Kala Davamanam Param Rishtam Atyanto Drutya Gopya. Param Rishtam Atyantato Drutya Gopya. I worship the Supreme Controller, whose form is eternal, full of knowledge and bliss. So from the very onset of this song, the form of God is being established. The form of God, that God has a form. The absolute truth has a form. That's the first thing that's established. And I think that's why I think deep down many of us, all of us, or those who are personalists and trying to be personalists, like the month of Damodar so much, is because we're reminded that God is a person, that God has a form. And in a world full of impersonalism, this comes as good news. It comes as news. It comes as a disastrous news for some. Just like, the U.S. election is going to be some disastrous news for, 50% of the United States. So in a similar way, the fact or the idea that God has a form can come as disastrous news for the residents of the material world who are here, as we understand, because they don't want to accept that God has a form. So, from the very beginning, we have this establishment that God has a form, this Satchit Ananda Rupa. We hear this also in the Brahma Samhita, Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchit Ananda Vigraha. That's the first verse of the Brahma Samhita. And that God has a form, a transcendental form, unlike our material forms, which are temporary and which die and which are transient. So not only is God a person, not only does he have a form, but as this verse describes, he has these amazing qualities and, as Sundarananda was explaining earlier, leelas, pastimes. So, I worship the Supreme Controller, whose form is eternal, full of knowledge and bliss. Upon his cheeks, makara-shaped earrings are swinging. So he has shark-shaped earrings, and he shines most brilliantly in Gokula. Gokula, Goloka Vrindavan. Our scriptures mention Goloka Vrindavan or Gokula as the topmost, most confidential planet of the spiritual world, of the kingdom of God. Among all the Vaikuntha planets that exist in innumerable numbers, the topmost among them all is Goloka, Vrindavan. And in that topmost planet of the spiritual world, there's a little boy who's running around. What an amazing idea. Running from the grinding mortar in great fear of Mother Yashoda. He was ultimately caught by behind. So this alludes to this story from the 10th canto in the Krishna book, the famous story where Yashoda is running after Krishna. Why? Because he got angry. Why? Because he wanted milk from her breast, and she was in the middle of boiling milk, and she told him to wait, and so he felt offended that he couldn't get his mother's breast milk. Now, of course, these are all transcendental pastimes. We have the mother of God, God himself, all have spiritual, eternal forms. And so these pastimes of, wanting to drink milk from one's mother and such things like that have to be seen on a spiritual, transcendental platform, of which this material world is a sort of our scriptures say, is a reflected, temporary, perverted reflection. So he's weeping incessantly, right? Because his mother just caught him, finally. Because he was giving butter to the monkeys. And I was listening to Indradyumna Swami, a famous leader, most of us know him. He's in Vrindavan, he spoke on the first day of Kartik, and he mentioned that some commentators say that these monkeys were the same monkeys that helped Lord Ramachandra when Krishna appeared as Lord Ramachandra and went to Sri Lanka to save Sita from the hands of Ravana. Those same monkeys, he felt indebted to them because they helped. So millions of years later, and when he comes himself in Vrindavan, those same monkeys supposedly came and he paid them back, so to speak, by giving them butter. I'd never heard that before, but that we can believe that's from an authoritative, acharya statement. Now, how did Yeshua, this famous idea, this famous theme of man's effort and God's reciprocation, that theme is embodied in the catching up by God's mother, by Yashoda, the fact that she's able to catch up with him. We learn exemplifies this point of endeavor and reciprocation. Because it's stated that when Yashoda was running after Krishna, she couldn't catch him. Because it's described, her transcendental body is a little on the heavy side, and Krishna's a young boy, and so she wasn't able to run after to catch him. As a matter of fact, it says that she even had sweat. And so out of kindness and seeing the effort of his mother, Krishna allowed himself to be caught. Right? And as we hear later on with the idea of the ropes, she binds him to a grinding mortar as a punishment. But what happens? She can't tie Krishna. She gets some more rope, and she makes the rope longer, and as she tries to tie Krishna to the grinding mortar, again, she can't tie him up. So she can't catch up to him, he allows himself to be caught. She tries to tie him up again and again with more and more rope, and each time there's about 2 fingers worth missing in terms of distance. She can't tie him. And again, when he sees her efforts, she agrees to be bound. And what do the acharyas say? Again, man's endeavor to reach God or to serve God, and then God, his compassion towards man. Those 2 ingredients must be there. So in other words, you have to try to be Krishna conscious, and when you try to be Krishna conscious, then Krishna reciprocates. As he says in the Bhagavad Gita, Ye yata mam prapadyante tam sataiva bhajamyaham. As one surrenders unto me, to the degree that one takes shelter of me, I reward them accordingly. So, weeping incessantly, he rubs his eyes with his 2 lotus hands. His eyes are filled with fear. He takes heavy breaths again and again that cause the pearls and other ornaments around his neck, which is marked by 3 gracefully curling lines, to tremble. I offer my pranams, my obeisances to that Damodar who is bound by his mother's love. So that grinding mortar rope can be also seen as his mother's love. God is fully independent, but he becomes bound by his devotee's love. To quote an extreme example of this, or to quote a famous passage of this, to illustrate this same point, in the first chapter of the Rasa Lila pastimes in the 10th canto, when the 5 chapters, the summum bonum of the 10th canto, the Rasa Lila, the dance of Krishna with the gopis in the middle of the night on the bank of the Jamuna, which Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says is the crown jewel of all of Krishna's pastimes. The very first verse of that chapter, which I think is chapter 28 or something, or chapter 27 to 32 of the 10th canto, the first verse says that Lord surrendered himself to Yoga Maya. God, just like, for example, if you have a king and he gives power of attorney to his prime minister because he's really sick, or when that happens, right? When a president or a leader becomes incapable of ruling, he gives his power of attorney to someone else. So God gives his own power of attorney to his illusory divine energy of love, his Yoga Maya, his elusive energy of his internal illusory energy, which makes the great souls forget that God is God, and which enables intimacy between the soul and God. So that first verse says that God himself fully gave himself, like, you take control now. You take control. I'm no longer the supreme controller. You go ahead, and I fully surrender to Maya. To Yoga Maya. There's 2 different Mayas, right? There's Maha Maya, the illusion of identifying with this physical body and the false ego and so on. But then the Gaudiya Vaishnavas talk about a Yoga Maya, a divine illusory potency, which actually creates intimacy between the soul and God by moving away notions of respect and how would we say, veneration and so on. So we see that theme coming into play here again, where God is bound by his devotee's love. So verse 3. Iditriksa lila birananda kunde svagosham nimajantam akyapayantam tadiyashite geshu bhaktirjitatvam puna primastam shatavriti vande. Through pastimes, through leelas such as these, he drowns the residents of Gokula in pools of ecstasy. So these pastimes of Krishna create bliss in the residents of Vrindavan. We are reminded of when Lord Chaitanya is also a child, and he also creates bliss in the hearts of the associates of Gora, of Navadvip as a child. But anyway, we're here with Damodar, so let's go to Lord Chaitanya. But somehow I'm reminded of the pastimes you read in Chaitanya Bhagavat, where Baby Nimai is enchanting all the ladies of Navadvip, and they're asking him questions that you would ask to a child, and he answers and behaves like a child, reciprocates the love of these residents of Navadvip, these associates of Mother Sachi, as an ordinary child would. The only difference is that here's the perfect child. Here's the child who has an eternal form of bliss and knowledge, and who fully satisfies the love of everyone. So these pastimes drown the residents of Vrindavan in pools of bliss. And not just the residents of Vrindavan, but they drown all of us. I mean, all souls are supposed to be enraptured in love of God, right? And the very fact that Krishna performs his pastimes, especially in this material world, is to attract us back to him. So the first recipients of his ecstasy, or the ecstasy of God's pastimes, are the intimate associates of the Lord who are near him in Goloka Vrindavan, or around him when he descends in this world in Vrindavan on the earth planet. But by extension, these same pastimes give even us who are trying to be devotees bliss. And therefore, as much as we are, conditioned souls, and we'd much rather, well, for example, spend hours watching who's, leading between Trump and Biden, or who won between the Lakers and, let me get this right, because I did waste time watching it, the Lakers and whoever they beat, Miami, and so on and so on. Even to us, these pastimes are supposed to give us a little bit of taste, of remembrance, of like, oh yes, this is the spiritual world. Problem with us is that we are somewhat conditioned, or very conditioned, and Rupa Goswami tells us we're like people who have jaundice. Jaundice is a condition of the liver, right? And pre-industrial times, when you have this liver dysfunction, everything. The remedy is sugar candy. The symptom is probably the same when you have jaundice industrial revolution and post-industrial revolution. Everything sweet you eat tastes bitter. But the solution, or the remedy, according to traditional Ayurvedic remedies, at least back then in the 16th century in India, is to eat sugar candy or rock candy, which tastes very bitter. But Rupa Goswami tells us that just as you force yourself to eat sugar candy, which actually is very sweet, but because you have a condition, tastes very bitter, gradually the effect of that sugar candy cures the liver, cures the condition of your liver, and gradually, when you no longer have jaundice, the candy actually starts tasting sweet again. It always was sweet. You just tasted it as bitter because of your liver condition. So in a similar way, Rupa Goswami tells us, by hearing the pastimes of Krishna, by hearing and chanting the holy name of Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, our liver condition, which is avidya, ignorance, our ignorance becomes cured. Slowly but surely, and then one day, oh wow, this rock candy really does taste great. Oh wow, Krishna book really is relishable. Oh wow, I really do like chanting Hare Krishna. And like I often say, even at our conditioned state, we can't be too hard on ourselves. In this sense that, we certainly, at least speaking for myself, we're not at the level where, oh my God, I can't wait. I'm tired now. It's 10 p.m. I'm going to go to sleep. And I have to give rest to this body, so I'm going to sleep 6 hours. But I just can't wait till 4 o'clock a.m. rings. My alarm rings tomorrow. As a matter of fact, I don't even need an alarm because I'm so excited that I'm going to, give a minimum amount of rest to my body. And the first thing I'm going to do, as soon as I wake up tomorrow morning, is I'm going to pick up those japa beads and I'm going to chant Hare Krishna, because I feel so much eagerness to chant the holy name. That's not me. That's probably not most of you, right? But we can't go to the other extreme and say, oh my God, I have no tea. I mean, the mood is good. I mean, Mahaprabhu himself says, right? Nam namakari bahudan nijasarva shakti tatrarpita nyamita smarane nakalaha itadrishita vakripa bhagavan mamapi durdhaivam idrisham iha janina nuragaha. Your name is so wonderful, it's so sweet, you have so many names, and yet I'm so, there's no rules to chant the name, there's no hard and fast rules, there's no stricture, no dress code, no nothing important. I mean, no strictures, it's accessible and everything, and yet, Durdhaivam, I'm so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. And that's God himself. That's Mahaprabhu who, a few years later in the Gambhira temple in Jagannath Puri is rubbing his head against the wall and starting to bleed. Is he whose teeth are starting to fall from his own, mouth because of separation from Krishna. He whose limbs are becoming, we read in Chaitanya Charitamrita the descriptions of the ecstasy of Lord Chaitanya in separation from Krishna, from God. So, such ecstatic symptoms that are just literally superhuman. And he, by the same token is writing, is saying, I have no attraction for them. I have zero attraction for your name. Right? So that mood, that sentiment is there in our scriptures, in our tradition, in the expression of our great teachers, and the expression of God himself as he comes in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But at the same time, we cannot also neglect the fact that we who are practicing Krishna consciousness, we do have some attraction to the holy name and to Krishna's pastimes. The proof is, for example, when there's a Ratha Yatra, a big festival, a chariot festival going down the streets once a year, as is organized in many cities in the world. You notice the devotees have so much enthusiasm. Or when you are trying to reach a public kirtan that's going on and you don't know exactly where it is, and you come out of the metro and where's the kirtan? And you hear ching 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 ching. Oh, it's over there, and then you run to it. A sadhu, an advanced soul is coming to give a seminar, like a Sachinandan Swami is coming to give a seminar, and you come. Well, let's not be late. Let's go hear about Krishna. So even at at our conditioned state, we do have some attachment, some fascination with Krishna. And here, the Satyavrata Muni is telling us that these pastimes of Krishna drop people in. What did he say again? They drown the residents of Vrindavan in pools of ecstasy. And thereby, what do they thereby? They inform people who are aware of his godhood that he can only be conquered by his devotees. Hundreds of times I again offer loving obeisances to him. So once again here, by these pastimes, Krishna is showing us that, hey, I am conquered by love. I am conquered by love. Again, I remember this class by Indradyumna Swami. He quotes some of our acharyas. When Nala Kuvera and Manigraha, I'll speak about that a little, I think the next verse. Krishna actually liked a lot more the chastisement of Yashoda and the other cowherd girls of Vrindavan than the prayers, the reverential prayers of Manigriva and Haya and gods and demigoddesses. And Prabhupada explains this often in his lectures, that if God's a person, after some time he gets tired of just always having everybody like, oh, you're God, my God, my Lord, please accept my obeisances and please give me this if you don't mind, and oh, you're so great. And it's like, okay, fine, but after some time, and Prabhupada gives the example of, like, for example, right, some man wants to go see some very important company CEO, and he goes to the office, and I'd like to speak to Mr. Johnson, and the secretary says, oh, Mr. Johnson's very busy right now, he's in a very important meeting, but please wait. So he waits 1 hour, and then he's like, well, I've been waiting for an hour. Can I please speak to Mr. Johnson? He's like, oh, well, he's very, very busy. So he actually, without her seeing, he goes and he looks inside the office, and Mr. Johnson is on his knees and hands with his grandson on his back. He's playing with his grandson, with the child of his own son or daughter. And the son, the grandson is like playing, like he was a horse, and he's like enjoying playing the role of a horse, carrying a little baby, playing. That's the important meeting. Because he's so busy with, so many money-related things, but he likes this intimacy, and he's not able to get that intimacy except with maybe his grandchild. So in a similar way, Prabhupada describes beautifully, God wants that intimacy too. I mean, if we enjoy having pleasure with our grandson, or with our girlfriend, or with our wife, or with some friends, there's intimacy, as opposed to, official roles in society or this or that, then what to speak of God? And remember I spoke a few minutes ago about this Yoga Maya. That's where this Yoga Maya comes in, precisely so that these intimate relationships between between God and sometimes in India people speak of God like the God. Sorry if there's any people from India listening. I do not mean to insult the accent of Indian people. It's just funny. So God likes this intimacy, and so Yoga Maya comes in and makes souls forget that He is God, the creator, the destroyer, the maintainer, but that He's actually just a really cute little kid, or such a charming little boy that you have a crush on, or such a cool runner, and he plays hide and seek so well in the forest with us. That intimacy is strengthened by God's own arrangement of this Yoga Maya, this illusion energy. And so we see it here. Yashoda doesn't see Krishna as God. As a matter of fact, at one point, remember there's a pastime where she opens Krishna's mouth, right? And because Balaram and the cowherd boy, the other boys got, they lost, right? So they tell Yashoda, yeah, Krishna ate mud. And he's like, I didn't eat mud. He's like, well, let me see your mouth. And she opens Krishna's mouth. And at that point, just for a split second, Krishna reveals to her, in Krishna's own mouth, the entire universe, the entire cosmos. And he gives her, I guess, what Arjuna sees in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, something similar to the universal form, right? And some Christian mystics, I must say, have testified to that sort of mystic experience as well, where they see the entire creation, past, present, and future, everything in one thing, right? And she's like, And then she sees one universe, and she sees planet Earth, and then she sees herself looking into Krishna's mouth. And so at that point, she kind of loses that intimacy, that this is my little boy. He was a bad boy. I have to spank him. And at that point, Krishna's like, And he makes that vision disappear again. And she gets distracted by some, I don't know if it's the fire, or she just forgets this vision of God as the creator and the source of everything. And again, she's just overwhelmed by her motherly affection. So, next verse. Varam deva moksham na moksha vadimva. This is great. This is the great verse against the impersonalism. That we don't want moksha. Na moksha, na moksha. Varam deva moksham na moksham vadimva. Nachanyam vrineham vareshadapiha. Idam teva purnata gopala balam. Sada mimanasya virastam kimanyai. O Lord, I do not ask for liberation from this world. So devotees don't care about not taking birth again. I remember I was with Hridaya Nanamarg once in Italy some years back, 3 summers ago, and I asked him, do you want to go back to the spiritual world when you die? And he told me, I don't care. I have my service here, I have my service now. Have my service after I die. It was all about service, That impressed me. It was just, one example in my personal life that exemplifies this theme here, that devotees of Krishna are not really after liberation. But if you're, like Igor Prabhu is here, he's in the yoga scene, in the yoga world. And in the yoga world, for example, those who are a little bit inclined towards philosophy, in most cases are completely leaning towards Advaita Vedanta, towards impersonal liberation, right? Where the whole goal of yoga ultimately is, moksha, is liberation from what? From the cycle of birth and death, and merging into some white light, becoming one with everything, where God no longer has a form, and you are God, and I am God, and we're all one. Now, the Bhagavatam does admit this as a bona fide realization. We can't be too extreme either. The Bhagavatam which we follow, right, the text which we follow after the Bhagavad Gita does talk about Brahman realization as an actual realization of the absolute truth. Brahman, what is it? Jnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti shabdyate. So with Bhagavan, or the Supreme Person, Damodar, as the ultimate realization of the absolute truth. But the preliminary realization of the absolute truth, and a bona fide one at that, being that of God as some, Brahman, just some spiritual energy. That's kind of boring, though, with all due respect, especially for devotees. It's like, okay, yeah, well, I'm just going to float and just be. I'd rather dance with God. I'd rather eat with God. I'd rather get angry with God, and I'd rather embrace God or be embraced by God. So here, as Lord Chaitanya says in the Shikshashtakam, Nadanam najanam nasundarim kavitam va jagadisha kamaye mama janmani janmani. Like life after life, I'm willing to serve you. Not just willing, I want to serve you life after life. And again, whether I take birth again or whether I don't take birth again, doesn't matter. Famous conversation of Prabhupada in 1977 or 1976 in Atlanta. Back in 1976, 1977, in the history of ISKCON, with the Hare Krishna movement, in those days, in the 76, 77, there was a very big push in North America for the distribution of Srila Prabhupada's books, mostly by young men and women who were at that time, young, enthusiastic, full-time, monks or missionaries, who were boiling over with enthusiasm and experiencing some serious mystical reciprocation with Krishna, I must say and admit, because even I had a little bit of that sort of experience when I was a young monk distributing Prabhupada's books in the Los Angeles airport. It was an amazing experience for me. And so they asked Prabhupada, like some devotees have expressed their feelings that they want to distribute your books life after life. Like they don't want to go back to the spiritual world when they die. They just want to come back and distribute your books life after life. And Prabhupada said, very good, this is pure devotion. He said, not that I distribute books to go to Vaikuntha. Not that I, do some service, some seva, some bhakti yoga for the sake of, getting liberation from the material world. But no, let me distribute books, life after life. I want to do that. That's pure devotion. Pure devotion. Now, we can't forget either that Krishna himself promises us in the Bhagavad Gita, 4th chapter, verse 9, that one who understands him even a little bit, tattvataha, what happens? Punarjanma, no more janma karma chame divyam vivam yo veti tattvataha chakva deham punarjanma naiti mamiti sorjuna, that upon leaving the material body, no more taking birth. So Krishna himself, God promises us that if we dedicate our life to him, we won't take birth again. We won't take birth again. No more reincarnation. We do go back to Vaikuntha or even to Goloka Vrindavan. But from the devotee's point of view, the devotee is like, you know what? I'd love to, like Prabhupada once said, all I want to do is just go back to the spiritual world and eat kachoris with Krishna. So the devotee has a desire to go back to the spiritual world. It's not that desiring to get out of the cycle of birth, and that especially in order to have an intimate relationship with God in Goloka Vrindavan is some sort of, evil or sinful desire. No, it's a very Krishna conscious desire. But by the same token, the desire to supersede that desire with service, and that service takes precedent, and as the Christians say, thy will be done, thy will be done, like whatever you want me to do, my Lord. If you want me to take birth again, so be it, I'll do it, because all I want to do is serve you. And if for some reason you think I should take birth again, no problem. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, let me take birth again, even as a dog. Even as a dog, let me just be a dog in the house of your devotee, please. At least let me be a dog in the house of some bhakti yogi so I can hear the holy name and eat some prasadam. So here Satyavrata Muni tells us, I don't want liberation from this world, nor even the highest liberation of residence in Vaikuntha. Nor do I seek any other benediction. No other benediction, not even liberation. So, what does Satyavrata want? He says, my Lord, may this form of yours, as Bal Gopal, a little cowherd boy in Vrindavan, forever remain visible in my heart. That's all I want. Now, if you go on Google, with all due respect to some artists who have produced pictures of Krishna in the last several centuries, but when you type, baby Krishna on Google, some paintings of Krishna are just really not, like, you're like, oh my God, if that's God, like, I don't want to go there. There's some depictions of Krishna which are just like very, very unaesthetics, at least to my aesthetics, and I think to a lot of aesthetics of a lot of well, to speak frankly, to people from a Western background who are used to Greek, aesthetics. I'm not speculating here, I'm just being realistic. And therefore, we have to remember that in spite of some depictions that we may find, because honestly, speaking from experience, and we're supposed to speak from our realizations, right? Even during class. So here's my realization about this. I've often, over the years, seen pictures of baby Krishna, which are like really not attractive to me. And it's kind of depressing, like, oh my God, like, if that's the person who's supposed to be all attractive, and I don't really want to go there. I don't find that person attractive at all, this baby attractive at all. But we have to remember that we kind of have to go beyond, not the form, of course, but beyond some, contemporary depictions of Krishna we may find online that we just don't find attractive. And remember that, Krishna really is, as a young boy, as a young child, like, just imagine your greatest, imagine what a young, beautiful child must look like, according to your own preferences, your own conditioning, okay? Just conceive of what the cutest, most fascinating little baby or kid must look like, right? Not like, these huge cheeks and whatever, or maybe if that's what, attracts you, horrible, great. But for you, just imagine what that, and that's that multiplied by infinity is Krishna. The cutest, most amazing little young lad, that's Krishna, right? And so Satyavrata Muni is saying, look, I don't want anything else but that vision. If I can just see you, my little boy, little child. Like there's this painting, there's this picture of Krishna, again speaking personally, that some devotee from South America painted. If I had it with me, I'd show it to you. And that picture of Krishna is just like, when you look at it, you're like, oh my God, like, oh, it's so beautiful. And so you can get a glimpse of what Satyavrata Muni is begging here. I don't want liberation. I don't want any other benediction. May this form, as a young boy, forever stay in my mind, in my consciousness. Okay, reading the next verse. Idam timu kambojam atyanta nilai vritam kuntai like snigda raktaischa gopya muhus jumbitam bimba rakta dharam me manasya virastam alam lakshala bhai. Your lotus-like face. So here we go. We get the descriptions of Krishna's face right from the Sanskrit, not from, via somebody's painting which we may not feel attracted to. Your lotus-like face, encircled by soft, blackish blue, curly locks of hair that have a reddish glow. So God, again, his hair is transcendental, and he has like this blue curling hair, which with like
black and blue.
With what?
Black and blue.
Black and blue, black blue with reddish glow. And that face is repeatedly kissed by Yashoda. So you've got Yashoda, constantly kissing this blue little kid who's so cute and attractive. May your lotus face with lips like red bimba fruit, so Krishna's lips are really red, always remain manifest in my heart. I do not care for about millions of other attainments. So once again, I gotta stress this thing. We're so lucky to be in a tradition that sees God as a person, that sees the absolute truth as a person. It's so reassuring. It's so nice to feel like, okay, hey, I've got a person here, not just some energy, not just some white light. Like, how do you take shelter of some white light? Like, imagine you go to a light bulb and you just look into it like, I feel really relieved by just staring into a light bulb. No, you feel relieved by calling your best friend and say, hey man, listen, I'm really suffering, help me out. Or by calling your mom or calling your dad or, embracing somebody. That's how you feel relieved, right? And what to speak of feeling pleasure? Forget about being relieved. How do you feel pleasure with some white light? Like, oh man, I'm getting such reciprocation from this white light. You don't. You get reciprocation from persons. You get reciprocation from souls. And in the ultimate sense, souls get their full reciprocation from the Supreme Soul, from the Supreme Person. And that love is then, reciprocated with other souls. So, many of us are afraid of having relationships because we've been burned and we've been hurt. I mean, in this life, we know we've all experienced being hurt and burned in one life, in this life. So imagine the accrued, traumas that are there for many millions of lifetimes. And so it's understandable that some of us would say like, oh, whoa. Then, the absolute truth, there can't be any relationships then, because relationships hurt. So there can't be any relationships. The absolute truth must be relationship-less. But no. Spirituality is about relationships, but it's about pure relationships, purified relationships, where souls interact with other souls as pure, selfless lovers of God. And where all souls reciprocate with God Himself selflessly, and God reciprocates with souls with, so much love as well. That's spirituality. Pure relationships. 2 more verses. Kuveratma jobadam murtyaiva yadvat tvaya mochito bhakti vajo krito cha tatha prema bhaktim svakam me prayacha namokshi graho me stidamo. Just as you freed the 2 sons of Kuvera, Manigriva and Nalakuvera, even while bound around the belly, and made them recipients of devotion, similarly please bestow upon me profuse prema bhakti to you in your form as a little cowherd boy. O Damodar, I long for this alone. I do not want any other kind of liberation. So again, this thing like, I don't want liberation. I just want to meditate on you. As, for example, the way that you delivered Manigriva and Nalakuvera. And so just to refresh our memory about this pastime, Manigriva and Nalakuvera were the sons of Kuvera, right? The treasurer of the heavenly planets. So like super rich teenagers. Like super, imagine jet set, Saint-Tropez, Monte Carlo, sons of like, multi-billionaires and, maybe, I don't know, whatever. The Russian mafia, and you've got kids who are born in that, in that context, who have like more money that they can't think of what else to do with it, and so they're just burning it every night by going out, in their Rolls Royce or their Mercedes to the great, and eating caviar and having so many girlfriends and debauchery of all kinds of most expensive drugs and so on. So that's Manigriva and Nalakuvera. That's Manigriva and Nalakuvera. Really rich teenagers who are just unruly and young and just like partying all the time. And so what happened is that, well, the Bhagavatam describes they were having some fun, some naked fun in some lake, right? With some beautiful girls and just enjoying. And then some sage, was it Narada or Parva? It's Narada Muni walks by. And the girls, when they saw Narada, they're like, oh, and they covered themselves, and they were like, just they sobered up out of respect for the sage who passed by. But the text describes the boys, Manigriva, not boys, they were, young adults, Manigriva and Nalakuvera, they didn't they were like, hey, no, whatever. It's not. We can just imagine. The text doesn't say exactly what they did, but they didn't show respect to Narada Muni. So we can just imagine. Maybe who knows what they did, but they were not respectful to him. So Narada cursed them. Oh yeah, you want to? Okay, fine. Then you take birth as trees, as Yamala Arjuna trees, which are like these big old trees that live a long time. And that was the idea. Like, okay, you want to be naked? Like Prabhupada would say, nudie. You want to be nudie? So fine, then you can take birth as trees, because you'll be like naked for like thousands and thousands of years. That's what trees are. They're naked, right? And so they get cursed. And then they were like, oh my God, they apologized to him, the prayers of Manigriva Nalakuvera. And so the text says, Narada said, okay, I bless you. Also that when Krishna appears, you'll take birth in the courtyard of Krishna's father and Krishna's mother. And you'll be delivered by Krishna himself. That was the blessing. So with every quote-unquote curse of a great saint comes a blessing also. Because you could think like, wow, that's kind of heavy. Narada Muni, that was heavy. But there's actually a blessing in disguise. And the blessing is always there to get us detached from our material attachments and attached to Krishna, to God. Because that's how we'll be actually happy. So, fast forward, and you've got Krishna, who's gotten tied by Mother Yashoda. He's tied to this grinding mortar, this big piece of wood. And he's crawling, and he's carrying this mortar, because even though he's a baby, he's all powerful. So he's able to carry a heavy mortar, which is much heavier than his physical, quote-unquote, weight. And he pulls the mortar, but then the mortar gets stuck between two trees. And those two trees are Manigriva and Nalakuvera, the cursed, teenage kids of Kuvera. And so the text describes Krishna pulled a little extra, and the two trees fell. And at that time came out of the trees these celestial forms, not Satchit Ananda, not like fully spiritual forms like Krishna, but forms that are subtle matter, the kind of forms that souls have when they, reside in the heavenly planets, in planets that are superior to planet Earth, but still within the material world. And so, watching this are all of Krishna's boyfriends, little boys who are also of the same age. And they're just looking at these two trees falling down and these two demigods or gods coming out and then circling Krishna. Really respectfully. You can imagine, you've got this little boy in a little village, and he just pulled two trees, and then there's these gods, these gorgeous gods who come out of these trees, and who offer their obeisances to this little baby, and then walk, respectfully around this baby. And then they go. So then the parents come, it's described, the residents of Vrindavan came, because they heard the noise, and they're like, what happened? And then you got the question, well, Krishna was, pulling this mortar, and then he pulled these two trees down, and then out of these trees came these gods, and they offered these prayers to him, and they circumambulated him, and then they left. And Rita Anandamar says, and so they were like, is there an adult here who can tell us what actually happened? They laughed. The Bhagavatam says they laughed. They're like, how cute. Really good imagination, kids. What actually happened here? Krishna almost died. What actually happened? They couldn't believe that the little boys were telling the truth, Because again, Yoga Maya is making them forget that Krishna's God. So how could, these demigods come out of these trees and start worshipping, our baby Krishna? It can't be, but it was. So that's the pastime of Nalakuvera and Manigriva. And Satyavrata Muni tells us, then, that's all I want. That's all I want. Just like you gave your love to these two souls, please give me also your love. Please give me your love. Your pure love. I don't want any liberation. And then he finally finishes with the last verse. Namastestu damne suraditi damne tvadiyodaraya da vishvasya damne Namo radhikayai tvadiyai priyayai Namo nantalilaya devaya tubhyam. O Damodar, I offer my obeisances to the rope binding your belly. And so therefore when you go to a lot of temples of Krishna now around the world, but also especially in India, you see like they have a temporary three-dimensional form of Krishna with Yashoda binding him, and then there's a rope, and people actually do they offer their arti, they offer their lamp to the rope, to that famous rope, which again signifies the sadhaka's effort to reach God and God's reciprocation and granting his grace to the sadhaka, to the devotee, to the aspiring devotee. And so he's saying that I offer my obeisances to the rope, which ties your belly, and your belly is an abode of brilliance. It shines. Your belly is the mainstay of the entire universe. So I offer my obeisances to your stomach, my Lord. And then he says, I offer again my obeisances to. Now he quotes Srimati Radharani. That was not a ecstatic expression. That was just like I can't even say that. When I say the name of Radharani, I go in ecstasy. I wish, but that's not me. But anyway, here he quotes Radharani. He mentions, I offer my respects to Srimati Radhika, your most beloved. And it's interesting because Radharani doesn't appear at all, especially in the 10th canto, she's just mentioned indirectly, right, by Shukadev Goswami. Just her name, or a shadow of her name is mentioned. But other scriptures do tell us that Krishna and Radha had dealings right from childhood. As a matter of fact, one that comes to mind is the one that it's said that Radharani was born blind. She was born blind. She had her eyes were closed. And her parents were like, wow, she's so beautiful, but she's blind. But she wasn't blind. She was just keeping her eyes closed until the day when baby Krishna would happen to be with his parents in the house of Radharani, and he would he barely walk himself, and he would climb just to see the baby crib where Radharani was sleeping. And just when he looked at her, that's when she opened her eyes. So that she would see Krishna as the first thing she sees. Such beautiful pastimes. So here Satyavrata Muni is saying, I offer my obeisances to the rope, I offer my obeisances to your stomach, and I offer my obeisances to your most beloved Srimati Radhika. I offer my obeisances to you, my divine Lord, who performs unlimited transcendental pastimes. So during this month, in any month actually, you should just continue chanting Hare Krishna, and maybe spend a little time reading the first chapters of the Krishna book, especially this month, because that's when we're supposed to meditate on Krishna as a child, these childhood pastimes of Krishna. And if we continue doing this, chanting Hare Krishna every day and reading the Bhagavatam, listening to lectures, trying to spread Krishna consciousness one way or other, then we'll always, to a greater or lesser degree, but hey, we'll accept even a little bit, right? But a little bit is better than nothing. We'll be grateful to have Krishna, that cute little boy, in our life, in this life and for eternity, we hope. Jai. Damodar ki jai, Srimati Radharani ki jai, Yuga Dharma Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai. Hvala, Bog, Hare Krishna. Svasti.